So it is 3 minutes past 8 on November 30th. Day should hopefully be uploading this. And I'm going through the footage, and it's reminded me that my OBS was incorrectly set up for the first 2 sessions. So it captured my audio, but not any of my machine's audio or any of the other players' audio. Which means I have 8 hours of footage from 2 sessions where all anyone would be able to hear would be me talking to myself. And even I'm not as much of a narcissist as to put that up and force you guys to maybe watch it. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a very TLDR fashion, just give you the basic rundown on what happened on each individual session. So, start with the first session. This one was the one that I recorded on the Thursday, a couple of weeks ago, I think. In this particular group, black coffee, because we've got no milk. In that particular group, we had Connor playing Magnus, the ex-Imperial current dock worker. Rakor was playing Bokrov, the Shavastavan soldier / aspiring sniper. We had Jackal playing TIA-76, the, I think, ex-Imperial reprogrammed droid. He keeps kind of going back and forth if he's Imperial or New Republic. Owen playing Vox, the Chase Pathfinder, I guess, for lack of a better term. And Ronan playing Cesath, the Kalish Scout. So the group was assembled on the planet of Telos. They had been following whispers, looking for a certain Mirialan captain called Ando, who knew the location of a certain colony world that was being, at the time, recently kind of settled. The location was being very closely hidden because the colony wanted to remain independent from both the Imperial remnant after the Battle of Endor and the burgeoning New Republic, but also because even if they did remain independent, if they did advertise their location, well, they are still essentially isolated and defenseless. Any number of pirates or criminal gangs could get involved and kind of try to leverage the colony itself. So the group had heard that this guy, Ando, knew the location of this colony and was planning on heading out in that direction soon. They'd been following whispers, and they found themselves at a cantina called the Rancid Sarlacc, very much like my mood right now. So, one by one, they kind of trickled their way into the cantina and basically all got the same information from the bartender suggesting that Ando was going to arrive at some point in the near future. Everyone, when Ando arrived, everyone save Connor, who was currently drunk at said bar, basically engaged in conversation with him and indicated in a kind of awkward back and forth where I think Owen wants to sleep with him or shoot him, I'm not sure. Basically they indicated that they were trying to get to the colony. It was at this point a couple of Imperial stormtroopers walk into the cantina, and naturally Connor takes it upon himself to make things infinitely more complicated and goes up and starts accidentally antagonizing them by forgetting that he's not an Imperial anymore. So that happens, a small altercation breaks out, and Cesath kind of intervenes on Connor's behalf, on Magnus's behalf I should say, almost physically disarms a couple of stormtroopers and at least encourages them to leave. Cut forward to a couple of days from there, after they've gotten kind of agreement from Ando. The group assembles at the dock where his ship, the bulk hauler, the Bountiful Harvest, is currently moored. They all load up. They're introduced to TIA-76, who's currently operating under the disguise of belonging to Ando for some reason. They take off and they get underway. While underway, Ando reveals to the now passengers that they are not the only passengers, and that he is essentially transporting not refugees exactly, but people who would, to quote A New Hope, avoid Imperial entanglements during their travel. So things are going pretty fine. They're traveling for, I think it worked out at just under a day or so to get from Telos to Ventuine, a stop-off system on their way to the colony itself. When they arrived in the colony itself, they were surprised by an Imperial patrol group comprising of one Imperial Star Destroyer and two Arcatan cruisers. The ship was hailed by the Imperials, and they basically said, right, you're not supposed to be here, you're not on our charts. We're going to come over and give you a quick inspection, make sure everything is okay. Naturally, the ex-Imperial starts to think, right, I can snowflake my way out of this, and he says, oh yeah, I've got these Imperial codes that will basically make the Imperials go away. So he broadcasts those to the captain, giving them his warmest regards, hoping that will then dissuade them. After he leaves the bridge of the Bountiful Harvest, Owen basically has the exact same plan, except he says, I'm going to use some of my Imperial Security Bureau codes. Shh! No one's supposed to know that. To tell them to basically fuck off because I'm on a job. So he sends those codes over as well. Neither of these work, partially because both of them were sent, because standard Imperial bureaucracy isn't really operating since the Battle of Endor, because the Empire is slowly falling to pieces. And the ship ends up getting boarded. A squad of stormtroopers comes over. Magnus goes to escort them towards the cargo hold, and while in essentially an airlock between two cargo compartments, he spins them this story about how the ship that he was serving on was destroyed. The Bountiful Harvest picked him up and has been kind of ferrying him since. He kind of flubbed the story a little bit when he said that they'd stopped off at Telos, an Imperial world at the time, and he hadn't reported himself to the local garrison to essentially be reassigned and accounted for. So the Imperial Stormtrooper Sergeant, who was having the conversation with, basically didn't believe him and went to arrest him. At which point Magnus pulls out a flashbang, flashes the whole corridor, and we enter the phase of the session that I like to call aggressive negotiations. Little episode 2 joke for you there. So they quickly enough dispatch that group of stormtroopers after stunning half of them, and the last two that were kind of stood guard at the airlock between the Bountiful Harvest and the Arcatan cruiser they arrived on were fairly quickly dispatched, but not before almost one-shotting Ronan, something that I will always enjoy. So they clear those guys up. They basically deprive the squad of stormtroopers that went to engineering of oxygen to remove them as a threat. They counterboard the Arcatan, at which point they split. Vox and TIA-76 go to the engine room, clear of the light guard presence that was there, and essentially TIA-76 hacks into the reactor of the cruiser and basically jury-rigs a remote self-destruct by essentially telling the reactor to just constantly generate power on an unsafe level, and basically you can just trigger it to go off when he so sees fit. Cezath and Magnus take the short turbolift journey from the main deck to the bridge deck, kill a couple of guards in the room, and basically take 3 of them prisoner. Magnus, because he's played by a bit of a sociopath, then proceeds to slit the throat of one of the unarmed prisoners, earning himself a dark side point. Oh, which reminds me, the stormtroopers that got flashbanged in the airlock, yeah, Vox executed those. They were lying unconscious on the floor and he shot them in the back of the head. So he also got a dark side point for that. So they take 2 prisoners, the lieutenants who was in control of the cruiser itself and one of the additional stormtroopers, take those aboard the Bountiful Harvest and basically rig the cruiser to fly directly towards the bridge of the Imperial Star Destroyer. So they hastily make an exit from the cruiser, watch as it flies in the general direction of the Star Destroyer, to then immediately be opened fire on by the Star Destroyer and the remaining Arcatan. The reactor blows, and the Imperial Star Destroyer suffers moderate damage as a result of the explosion, but because things were a bit fishy, they had their shields up just in time to not suffer any kind of critical damage. So the ISD Grim Resolution is still essentially effective, and the captain has a bit of a grudge with whoever was on that ship. But the passengers aboard the Bountiful Harvest managed to get away with no casualties and only minor scratched egos on behalf of Connor and perhaps Vox. So they arrive at Ardent, and that's basically where we pick up at the start of the next episodes. So on the Saturday session, the group comprising of Sebastian playing, I'm just going to call him ZZ, because that's just how we've kind of referred to it now. He's an Ithorian scoundrel. Jack playing Zochar, a Keldor Force-sensitive Jedi character. Sebastian is playing Sarlacc. He's a Gossam Jedi. We also have Adam. Well, I'll call the one Adam, and I'll refer to one as his like Twitch name. So we've got Adam from the Great Crusade series, who is playing another droid, ACM3. He's playing Acme. He's a big, burly kind of combat droid. And then we have New, I think is how he's supposed to pronounce his name, NYU, who is playing essentially the character he plays in our home D&D game, except instead of being a tiefling rogue, he's a Deveronian scoundrel, ex-Imperial pilot. Fairly good character. I like him so far. I feel like I'm forgetting someone. Tim! Tim is playing a Mon Calamari mechanic / medic. He's not done a great deal yet, which is probably why I forgot about him. So, they are on the Outer Rim world of Cernpedal. Cernpedal, for those of you who don't know, is notable for being a barren, surfaced, kind of tunnel-laden planet. Its almost 8 million strong population consists primarily of refugees who fled there about 3,000 years ago when their original planet was going to get engulfed by their supernova. And it's the planet where in the old expanded universe Chewie dies because he gets crushed by a moon. Rip Chewie. Yeah, so the group, very similar to the group on Telos. They've been following whispers of this colony that they're trying to get to, and they've heard word that there is a professor, one Elias Withers, on this planet, who knows the location of this colony that they're all trying to get to, for their own various reasons, odds and ends. They all find themselves, again, similarly to the crew on Telos, because I'm an imaginative person, in a cantina. This one is called the Hungry Hungry Cave Slug. Bit of a reference there for you, for those of you familiar with young age British reading habits. I don't know if they have the Hungry Hungry Cannibal or anywhere else. So they are told that Professor Withers is currently off on some kind of archaeological site on the surface, and will be returning with a borrowed speeder and supplies to a merchant who is currently waiting in the cantina. Not long after ZZ has basically managed to persuade this merchant to give him half of his meal for free, because he's literally the definition of a petty criminal. One of Withers' research assistants that he'd kind of taken on from the planet arrives, and kind of huffing and panting explains that the research site had been taken over by pirates. So the crew, or the group, take it upon themselves to go back with the research assistants to, in one way or another, deal with the pirate problem, rescue Withers, and have him take them off world. They're told that his ship is basically the research site is basically, it's like an old villa or like manor house perched on the edge of a canyon, and then dug into the canyon wall itself there is like a landing pad. So Withers' ship is currently parked on that landing pad, and they're gonna go drive over on the surface and see if they can basically get in, deal with the pirates, find the way to get into the underlayer, because it's closed off, and find Withers and persuade them to take them to the colony. So they travel to the dig site. It's a manor house, the architecture, for anyone who's seen Rogue One, it's a very kind of reminiscent of Vader's castle. I described it as almost pyramid-like, but the top kind of capped off. It's not as tall as Vader's castle, but it's similar. It was supposed to be a bit of a thematic hint. So they arrive. Sarlacc and ZZ basically walk into the compound and basically say to the pirates, "Look, we don't really care about you. We're just here to have a conversation with the professor. We're willing to help you find him because we've heard that you can't get into the lower level, which is where we think he is. If you let us in, we'll have a crack at it. And once we've had a conversation with him, you can do whatever you want with him." It takes a little while for the pirates to kind of hum and haw over this offer. But eventually they begrudgingly accept. The party are allowed entrance into the manor under guard, albeit, and they're allowed to kind of have a look around the rooms that the pirates have gotten access to so far. This comprised of a main entry hall with columns with nothing in it. The office of the manor, I suppose you could call it, which was being kind of used as a temporary kind of quarters for the pirate captain, who was trying to essentially brute force a way through a kind of a password system on an old terminal, written with symbols and stuff on the keyboard in a language that nobody recognized. A kind of old, what looks like maybe a personal museum or an archive room, and then on the far side it looks like an old training dojo of some kind, with words in this ancient text written in the wall in what looks like blood. Ooh, very ominous stuff. So they kind of go about, they do a bit of looking around. They investigate the archive museum room, and they actually find that in a pile of books that don't look nearly as old as some of the ones on the floor, they find an old journal, or a recent journal, I should say, really, that belongs to Withers, the professor. So they kind of skim through it, and they find basically a cipher for the old text on the wall. They go back and they discern some key words, those words being passion, strength, power, victory, I think were the ones I used. So those astute viewers among you will recognise that this is clearly an indicator that they're looking at fragments of the Sith code. So they then go back through into the captain's office, which is what we'll call it, and they manage to essentially input the missing phrases from the Sith code, which was essentially taking up a 5 monitor kind of display. Once they input the code, they heard the grinding of a large, heavy stone door. They returned to the archive museum room and saw that one of the far walls, a large kind of bookcase had slid to the side, revealing an ancient passage going down to the lower level. They proceed down to the lower level. They immediately find a chamber with a long, narrow bridge which has collapsed in the middle. With the assistance of ACM3 and his magnetic grappling hook, they manage to fairly effortlessly kind of make their way across to the far side, albeit not without one of the pirates who was accompanying them trying to climb over the gap and immediately proceeding to Wilhelm down the hole. The Jedi in the group, Gossip, Sarlacc, and Zochar, had a very distinct feeling of a kind of a negative energy or a presence in this kind of area. And I thought I very clearly directed them through one of the side walls adjacent to the bridge itself, indicating that there was something there that was kind of emitting this force kind of aura. And they proceeded to completely ignore it. It's fine, no fancy loot for them. They proceeded through into the next chamber and found a room lined with, I think it was about 7 kind of ancient looking statues. They do the MacGuffin to close the door behind them and open the one on the far side, and the door doesn't open. And emerging from the statues themselves are really, really old battle droids that proceed to attempt to shoot them, and I think not managing to land a single hit in the process, because I based their stat line off a B1 battle droid. And I forgot that they're terrible. Lessons learned. Lessons have been learned. So, they dispatch those droids and the door opens, at which point they receive a comm signal from Professor Withers himself, who's currently sat aboard his ship, a remodel, essentially, a remodel and a recolor of the old Ebon Hawk style freighter, and not just because that's the only image I could find on Roll20 to use, but it was. And he says, "Oh yeah, I'm currently being assaulted by a giant droid of some design. Ooh, be careful if you come out onto the landing pad." At which point the group goes out onto the landing pad, and a couple of them almost get blown away by this thing's heavy blaster cannon. After the Jedi have essentially hacked it to pieces with their fancy laser swords, because Jedi start this game with lightsabers at level 1, and Jack tries to argue that it's balanced. They dispatch it, but not before the thing essentially self-destructs. Because I know what Tim's like, and he would try to harvest whatever was left of that thing. So it blows up, and it almost takes through the party with it. But Tim, he does a mechanics roll, he still manages to salvage the blaster cannon, which was a bit fucked, but possibly repairable. They have a good conversation with us, who basically says, yes, I've got no intention of essentially taking part in this particular dig site while the pirates are still here. I plan on leaving, at which point the group indicate that they want to head to Ardent as well, the colony world, at which point he says, "Oh yeah, not a problem, I'll give you a ride." With no further background checks. He's intelligent, he's not wise. So they all load up and basically abscond from the historical site. And over the table, it was an ancient manor that belonged to a Sith Lord of the ancient Sith Empire, who constructed it about 3,000 years prior to the events of the session. I'm sure none of my players will watch this and feel disappointed that they didn't go and investigate what that loot might have been. So, at this point, everyone bar myself, Kinzuko, and Evan have arrived at the planet of Ardent. So, after you've watched this one, if you want to watch an actual episode of some actual roleplay, where you get to see a solid 5-minute stretch of me not being able to roll above an 8, go and check out Session 3, that Tim was kind enough to GM for me with like a day and a half's notice. It's a good one. It's only about 2 hours.